everyone, welcome back to Coach Craig Sports. Today we're just going to be doing a quick video. It's going to be with the start sits for Thursday Night Football. Thursday Night Football game is the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns. Both these teams are 0-1, coming off tough losses. The Browns got blown out by the Ravens, and then the Bengals, they went against the Los Angeles Chargers, and they lost by a field goal. Their field goal kicker actually missed a kick to lose the game right at the end of the game as well. So, getting into it, I got it up here on ESPN, so it looks like the Vegas line right now, the over-under total points scored is 43.5 points. Cleveland is favored by 5.5 points at home. Might be a little bit of a surprise there for some people, since the Browns did look so bad against the Ravens. It's probably a closer game than that, so if you're betting, probably take the under. And then the over-under points, that probably should be all right. Both teams' defenses aren't that great. Both teams' offenses didn't look too great in week one, but it should be close to that line. Then we'll go over to the fantasy side. So I got a bunch of notes down for each team. We'll go through player by player who to start and sit. So first guy up is Baker Mayfield. We'll pull up his stats real quick from last week. So last week he had 11.86 fantasy points. He completed 21 out of 31 passes, 189 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and ran the ball twice for 3 yards. In the game against the Ravens, Baker looked really bad. I would not recommend starting him this week, even though he is going against a pretty average Bengals defense. We got the two running backs for Cleveland, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. So we'll start out with Nick Chubb first. Last week, he had 10 carries for 60 yards. Pretty good yards per carry. He looked pretty good running the ball. He had 1 reception for 6 yards. He only saw 1 target as well. So in this timeshare of a backfield, Kareem Hunt is going to see most of the passing game work. So don't count on Nick Chubb too much in that department. He should see more carries this week, and he should be pretty productive there as well. He's a decent running back too, or like a flex play this week. Going against the Bengals, once again, they're a pretty average defense. Last but not least, I do have the snap count rates. So Nick Chubb only played 48% of snaps last week. Keep in mind that they were losing pretty bad, so late in the game they were trying to throw the ball a little bit more, so Kareem Hunt was in more because of that as well. But before that, it was probably closer to a 50-50 split. And then we'll go over to Kareem Hunt. So Kareem Hunt had 13 carries for 72 yards. He also looked pretty good running the ball last week. He had 4 receptions, and I believe it was 6 targets. But he only turned this in for 9 yards. He's a pretty solid flex play for this week overall. But those are the 2 running backs that we need to be concerned about for fantasy for Cleveland. Then we'll go over to the wide receivers. The main wide receivers we need to be worried about at this point is Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry. Carterell Hodge, he actually played, I think he played on 55% of snaps, but he only saw 3 targets, caught one of them and had 12 yards, so he's irrelevant for fantasy unless you're like in a giant league, like a 30-team league or something. We'll go Jarvis Landry. He's still got a questionable next to him. I believe that's because of his hip injury that he did have off-season surgery for. We'll take a look down here. It just says he's officially listed as questionable for Thursday's game. He was a non-participant in Tuesday's practice, so limited session represents a final step in the right direction. Pretty much, he played last week. I expect him to play again this week. Last week, he had 5 receptions for 61 yards on 6 targets, so he was pretty efficient. He's the guy that Baker goes to that he trusts in this offense. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Jarvis Landry have a pretty good game. You could roll him out as like a wide receiver 3 flex play type of game, especially against the Bengals defense. They're not too great against the slot anyways, so he's definitely somebody you can start and not have to be too worried about this week. And last week he was in on 71% of the snaps, so maybe they limited him a little bit coming back off that hip injury. I'm seeing some snaps, probably especially later in the game since they were losing by so much as well. Odell Beckham Jr. is next. He had a very poor first week. He had 3 receptions for 22 yards on 10 targets. Some of these were Baker's fault, and there's about 2 or 3 passes that Odell just dropped. So he could have had a better fantasy day. Against a lesser secondary than the Ravens, he should see pretty good production. You can kind of roll him out as wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in your fantasy lineup without too much worry there. The biggest concern is just how well him and Baker connect. He was out there on 75% of snaps, so he's going to be out there majority of the time as well. Then we'll move over to the tight ends. So big news here was David Njoku was placed on IR. He is probably their most effective tight end last weekend. scoring the touchdown. He looked pretty good while he was out there, so now it's going to be the Austin Hooper and Harrison Bryant show. Austin Hooper, of course, is the big guy that they brought in this offseason, paid him a lot of money to come in. He only saw 2 targets in the first game, caught both of them for 15 yards. He's probably not somebody I'm looking to start, but if you don't have any better option, feel free to start him. Maybe, I don't know how much he is in DFS. He could be a decent DFS play if he's cheap this week. He should see a couple more targets with Njoku out. He played on 77% of snaps, so out of all the guys on the offense, he was out there the most. They do run a lot of 2 tight end sets, so be sure to look out for him this week. If you have him and you have another tight end, you probably just going to want to sit him this week, see how he does, especially with Njoku out. Then we're going to go over to Harrison Bryant. Yeah, Harrison Bryant here. So he saw 2 targets in week 1, caught one of them for 5 yards. He's a rookie, 4th round pick. He was very, very good in college. They obviously took him very highly. They think highly of him. But he's not somebody that you want to consider for fantasy at this point. If you're in a dynasty league, make sure you pick him up because he's got a good long-term upside. And he played on 42% of the snaps last week. He should see a little bit of an uptick in snaps with David Njoku out. So he's more somebody you want to keep on like your sleeper radar. Then we'll go over to the Browns DST. Like I said, both quarterbacks weren't great week 1, so you could probably play the Browns defense in this matchup. They have a good defensive line, and they're going against the Bengals offensive line that did not look very good last week. So if you're in a league where you count sacks for defenses, be sure to fire them up with pretty good confidence. Last but not least, we got the kicker here, and the kicker's a new kicker. It's Cody Parkey. Austin Seibert was the kicker last week. He missed a field goal or 2, and they ended up cutting him for Cody Parkey. Parkey's been a well-traveled veteran kicker by now. He's not somebody I'm looking to pick up as a kicker. There should be plenty of options out there on your waiver, or out there on waivers for you guys, or whoever you already have is probably his better option as well. So that's pretty much the Browns in a nutshell. I'll go over to the Bengals real quick. Quarterback, we got Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is coming off his first start as a rookie, or his first career NFL start. He was 23 out of 36 passing for 193 yards, 0 touchdowns passing, 1 interception. If you guys watch that game, it was a pretty bad interception. He tried throwing a little shovel pass to I think it was Gio Bernard at running back at that point, and he threw it right to Melvin Ingram's belly. Ingram obviously caught it. Not the smartest play in the world. He did have 8 carries for 46 yards and 1 touchdown. He looked pretty good running on that touchdown. So Joe Burrow does offer some rushing upside there. Against this Browns defense, he should be better than he was week 1. Browns defense is obviously not as good as the Chargers defense. And with the weapons he has on the outside, if he gets enough time, he should put in a pretty decent week. But he's not somebody I'm looking to start unless you're in like a 2-quarterback league or a super flex league. Then we'll move over to running back. First guy up is Joe Mixon. He's one of my favorite guys this year. He had a tough week 1. He had 19 carries for 69 yards. Like I said, the offensive line really struggled against the Chargers, so he didn't have a lot of holes to run through. Mixon is a very talented running back, so the fact that he still was able to get 69 yards is probably a testament to him more than anything. He did have 1 fumble, and that was like his 2nd career fumble, so I would not be worried about him fumbling again. He had 1 reception for 2 yards, and he played on about 60% of the snaps. They still are using Gio Bernard more as that pass catching back, but I think as the season goes along, Mixon will kind of work his way into the passing game a little bit more as well, especially as he gets comfortable with Joe Burrow. Then Giovanni Bernard, you do not want to start him for fantasy. He had 1 carry for 7 yards. He caught 4 passes for 21 yards. He's pretty much irrelevant for fantasy. He's just, if you're in a league where you have Joe Mixon, he's pretty much a handcuff at this point. He will see the passing down work, and he was in on about 29% of snaps. So that's about all we got to say for him. He's also got that goofy-looking mustache. Then we'll go over to wide receivers. The main guys we're going to want to talk about here is A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, and John Ross. Those are the 3 that were on the field the most. The rest of the guys, T. Higgins, Auden Tate, and Mike Thomas, were on the field. They had about 15 snaps each, so they kind of rotated those guys a lot. Alex Erickson did see like 4 plays as well. So those guys I'm not too worried about, and I don't think they're going to make a big impact, at least in week 2. First guy up is going to be A.J. Green. Him and Tyler Boyd were probably drafted the highest out of these two, obviously. He had a decent week 1 week against Casey Hayward, who is a very good cornerback. He had 5 receptions for 51 yards. He had 9 targets overall. So he did show pretty good rapport with Joe Burrow. He was on a limited snap count, coming off pretty much a year and a half where he hasn't played. So he was only in there about 66% of the snaps, 45 snaps in total. That'll be something interesting to see going forward, how many snaps he plays in week 2, how often he's out there. The other big thing is which side of the field does he line up on. Usually he lines up on the right side of the field, and that's the side of the field that Denzel Ward is not on, according to Pro Football Focus. Kyle Yates was actually bringing that up on Twitter. Very good point, so shout outs to him there. So if he doesn't draw Denzel Ward, he could have a pretty good game as long as he stays healthy and he gets enough snaps. Then we got Tyler Boyd. He had 4 receptions for 33 yards. He didn't do much until late in the game. He had 5 targets overall. He did go against Chris Harris Jr. most of the game. And Chris Harris Jr. is like the best slot corner in the league. So he kept him bottled up pretty good. Tyler Boyd is a good wide receiver. He's great out of the slot. And I think Joe Burrow will have pretty good chemistry with him. He's a guy that's definitely worth starting this week, especially if you're in a PPR league. You can start him as your wide receiver 3 or your flex play and feel pretty confident about it. Same thing goes for A.J. Green. I didn't mention that before. But then the last guy we got here is going to be John Ross. John Ross was in on 84% of the snaps, so that was very reassuring for me. Zach Taylor does want to get him involved. He did see 5 targets. He only caught 2 of them for 11 yards, so he was a little bit limited. Like I said, Joe Burrow didn't have a lot of time to throw the ball against the Chargers. But if he gets more time to throw the ball, John Ross could be a pretty good play overall. I'm not real excited about him this week because he's probably going to line up on the side of the field where Denzel Ward's going to be covering him. So it's not a great matchup for him. He's probably a guy you want to play more in DFS than anything. But if you're out there in fantasy and you can pick him up and stash him on the end of your bench and kind of save him, I think that's worth getting. The tight ends, we got CJ Uzama and Drew Sample. We're not going to really worry about Drew Sample. He didn't play enough last weekend to really matter. CJ Uzama, he had 4 receptions for 45 yards. I talked about him in my waiver segment a little bit. He had 5 targets. He looked pretty good out there. He showed some good chemistry with Joe Burrow. He was in on 72% of the snaps, and he's definitely a sleeper at tight end. He's probably somebody that you want to pick up and stash on the end of your bench before you start him. If you're in DFS, he's pretty cheap out there as well. He's in a pretty good matchup against the Browns, so I wouldn't be surprised if he has a good game, but he's not somebody I'm looking to fire off at least this early in the season. Then we got the defense. Like I said, the Bengals defense is pretty average. You could probably start them and get away with it this week. Baker Mayfield is known to be turnover prone, but if you got better options, I go with the better options, obviously. And then last but not least, we got the kicker. This one's already a mess. I wouldn't mess around with either of these two guys. Randy Bullock was the kicker. He missed the game-time field goal last weekend. Supposedly he hurt his calf muscle. And they brought in Austin Seibert, oddly enough, who was the Browns kicker who got cut by the Browns this week for his performance. So needless to say, you do not want to trust either of these two guys. Obviously, there's going to be a better kicker out there on the waiver wire or already on your team. So that's pretty much it for the Bengals part of the segment. So I think it'll be a pretty interesting Thursday night game. It'll be really interesting seeing how 2 young quarterbacks do. 2 pretty average defenses, but both defenses have young up-and-coming players on their team. The Browns obviously have Myles Jarrett and Denzel Ward on their team. They're pretty banged up in the secondary otherwise, though. And then Cincinnati, they have Sam Hubbard and Jesse Bates, who are 2 very, very good young players. I think you'll be hearing a lot about them in the coming years as well. But overall, I think it'll be a great matchup. There might not be quite as many fantasy implications for this one, but it's definitely worth a watch if you guys have time to do so. But with that being said, that's pretty much all I got for this video. If you guys liked and enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. It helps build the community that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports. If you're a new or current subscriber who hasn't already done so, please also hit that notification bell. It will let you know every single time that I post up a video. Like I said in some of my past videos, we've been putting up a video pretty much every day. There's going to be a lot of content coming out throughout the season. A waiver wire contents, reaction of the week, DFS picks, start sit, do live stream again on Sunday morning before the games. Just a lot of really good fantasy football content coming out. Like I said yesterday, I'm actually finishing up my article, which was just my week one takeaways. Pretty much, I go through every team and things that just stood out from each game to me. But with that being said, that's all I got for this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and have a great rest of your day.